Welcome to Second Chance September, a heartwarming story of rekindled hopes, community spirit, and the transformative power of a love that refuses to fade. Set against the rugged charm of Maine's coastal autumn, this novel follows Eleanor Ellie Vance, an independent bookstore owner in her 60s who once believed her most passionate days had passed. Yet when MacAlister, a figure from her distant youth, reappears with plans to restore the old Port Hope Lighthouse, Ellie's carefully ordered life is cast into a swirl of memories, possibilities, and daring new beginnings. Amid swirling September winds and the cozy hum of a small-town diner, Mac and Ellie discover that even decades apart cannot extinguish the spark of a first love. Surrounded by the bustle of locals, some supportive, others skeptical, they set out to save their beloved lighthouse from the looming threat of corporate takeover. In doing so, they confront long-buried regrets, protective adult children, and a community on the brink of surrender to big money promises. Second Chance September invites you into the crisp seaside air, where friendships are tested, secrets are exposed, and hearts long for renewal like the turning leaves. As Ellie and Mac navigate storms both literal and emotional, they learn that it's never too late to fight for what matters, to champion your hometown, and to embrace the promise of a second chance at life and love. Settle in, and let the glow of a steadfast lighthouse guide you through an uplifting journey of rediscovery, courage, and the ageless possibility of starting anew. Chapter 1. Harbor Lights and Half-Forgotten Dreams. The Maine air, crisp and carrying the tang of salt and decaying leaves, swirled around Eleanor Ellie Vance as she stepped out of Bound by the Sea, her bookstore. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the charming, if slightly faded, main street of Port Hope. September in coastal Maine tourist season was winding down, leaving behind a bittersweet emptiness that echoed the one in Ellie's own heart. She locked the door, the brass knob cool beneath her fingers, and paused, taking a deep breath. At 60, Ellie felt adrift. Not unhappy, not exactly. She had her bookstore, a thriving business she'd built from scratch after her divorce. She had her children, James Jr. and Emma, both grown and flown, their lives unfolding far beyond the confines of Port Hope. But the quiet evenings, the empty chair across the dinner table, the persistent hum of what now, resonated a little too loudly these days. Ellie had been in safe mode for a long time. Divorce, single motherhood, building a business, they demanded a practicality, a resilience that had left little room for anything else. She'd become good at safe, comfortable, predictable. But safe, she was realizing, was starting to feel a lot like stagnant. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight was the annual Lighthouse Restoration fundraiser, a cause Ellie championed not just for the historical significance of the landmark, but for a deeply personal reason. The old Port Hope Lighthouse, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the harbor, held a fragment of her past, a whisper of a half-forgotten dream. As she walked towards the harbor, the sounds of the town enveloped her, the cries of gulls, the distant clang of a buoy bell, the murmur of conversations spilling from the open doors of the salty Siren Tavern. She passed familiar faces, exchanging smiles and nods. Port Hope was that kind of town, small, intimate, a place where everyone knew your name, your history, your heartaches. The fundraiser was being held on the grassy lawn surrounding the lighthouse. Strings of fairy lights twinkled, casting a warm glow on the gathering crowd. Tables laden with appetizers and drinks dotted the perimeter, and a small band played a mellow mix of classic rock and blues. The lighthouse itself, a towering sentinel of white stone, stood bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. Ellie spotted her best friend, Martha, near the refreshment table, a glass of wine in her hand and a skeptical expression on her face. Martha, a widow of 5 years, was a staunch advocate for the single and fabulous lifestyle, a philosophy she expounded upon frequently, usually with a healthy dose of cynicism. "Don't tell me you're actually here for the cause," Martha said, her voice laced with teasing amusement. "I thought you'd be curled up with a good book and a cat." Ellie chuckled. "I do support the lighthouse, she said. "And besides," she added with a mischievous glint in her eyes, I heard they're serving those little crab cakes you love. Martha snorted. Bribing me with seafood. You know me too well. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Honestly though, Ellie, this whole thing feels a bit desperate. All these middle-aged women hoping to snag a retired sea captain. Ellie sighed. Martha's cynicism, while often entertaining, could also be grating. Not everyone is looking for romance, Martha, she said. Some of us are just trying to support a good cause. Of course, dear, Martha said, patting Ellie's hand. You're the exception. The queen of classic romance, content with your books and your memories. Ellie's smile faltered. Martha's words, though spoken in jest, hit a little too close to home. It was true Ellie did find solace in the romantic worlds created within the pages of her beloved books. Worlds where love was grand, passionate, and always, always triumphant. Worlds that, she feared, existed only in fiction. There was one memory, however, she never truly managed to get. Her childhood sweetheart, and someone with the most beautiful soul she ever knew. As she sipped her wine, her gaze drifted towards the lighthouse. It was there, on the windswept rocks beneath its towering beam, that she'd shared her first kiss, her first heartbreak, her first fragile dreams of a future that never came to be. And it was there, amidst the throng of people, that she saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and eyes the color of the storm-tossed sea. A man she hadn't seen in over 40 years. A man who had once held her heart in the palm of his hand. Her breath caught in her throat. Her wine glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the grass, the sound swallowed by the murmur of the crowd. It was him. Jack MacAlister. Her first love, back in Port Hope. And just as she realized who stood before her, she fell, with no one to reach for what she sought. The ground that would support her dreams, and with whom she would follow to new ends. Chapter 2. Bookmarks and Bumped Elbows. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Ellie crumpled to the ground, the spilled wine soaking into the grass, a crimson stain mirroring the sudden rush of blood to her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm echoing the disbelief that surged through her. Mac. After all these years, Mac. She was vaguely aware of concerned voices, of Martha's sharp intake of breath, of hands reaching out to help her. But her gaze remained locked on the man who stood frozen, a few feet away, his expression mirroring her own shock. He looked older, of course. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair grayer, his shoulders carrying the weight of years and experiences she could only imagine. But the essence of him, the gentle kindness in his eyes, the slightly crooked smile that had always made her heart flutter, those were unchanged. Ellie, are you all right? Martha's voice, sharp with worry, finally penetrated the fog of her shock. Ellie blinked, forcing herself to focus. I'm fine, she stammered, her voice trembling. Just a little dizzy. Strong arms helped her to her feet. She found herself facing Mac, his face etched with concern. The years melted away, and she was 18 again, standing on the windswept cliffs beneath the lighthouse, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Evie? He said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. Is it really you? She managed a weak smile, her voice barely a whisper. It's Ellie now, she said. And, yes, it's me. He reached out and gently touched her arm, his fingers warm against her skin. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a familiar spark that she thought had been extinguished long ago. I can't believe it, he said, shaking his head in wonder. After all this time I know, she said, her voice still trembling. It's surprising. Martha, ever the pragmatist, cleared her throat. Well, this is certainly a dramatic reunion, she said, her voice laced with amusement. Perhaps someone should introduce us? Ellie, realizing that she had completely forgotten her manners, blushed. Oh, right. Martha, this is Jack MacAlister. We went to high school together. Mac extended his hand to Martha, his smile polite but strained. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said. Martha shook his hand, her eyes assessing him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Likewise," she said. "So, you're the famous Mac. Ellie's mentioned you a few times." Evie wanted to die as her friend said that. Mac did not seem to react, but was clearly concerned about her. Then Mac broke and said, "I think I understand. This is a bit of a blast from the past for both of us, so hopefully we can start anew for another time." "Sounds lovely," Evie said with a small smile. Evie, acutely aware of the awkwardness of the situation, quickly changed the subject. "So, what brings you back to Port Hope, Mac?" she asked, her voice trying for a lightness she didn't feel. "I bought the lighthouse," he said, gesturing towards the towering structure. "I'm planning to restore it." Ellie's eyes widened in surprise. "You bought the lighthouse?" she repeated.
"But why?"
Mac's expression turned serious.
"It's a long story," he said.
"But let's just say that it's something I need to do. For myself. And for the memory of someone I lost." Ellie sensed a deep sadness in his words, a hint of a story untold. She longed to ask him about it, to delve into the mystery that surrounded him, but she knew that it wasn't the time or the place. The conversation, while stilted, continued for a few more minutes. They exchanged superficial details about their lives, his career in the Navy, her bookstore, their children. But beneath the surface of the polite chatter, a current of unspoken emotions flowed between them, a reminder of their shared past and the undeniable connection that still existed. As the crowd began to thin, Mac excused himself, promising to call Evie later to talk. As he walked away, Evie watched him, her heart filled with a confusing mixture of emotions, excitement, trepidation, and a flicker of hope that she hadn't felt in decades. Martha, ever observant, raised an eyebrow. Well, she said, her voice teasing. "Looks like your classic romance novels are about to come to life." Evie sighed, turning to face her friend. "It's not like that, Martha," she said. "It's just strange. Seeing him again, after all this time." "Strange or exciting?" Martha asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Evie didn't answer. She didn't know what to feel. All she knew was that her carefully constructed world, her safe and predictable life, had been turned upside down by the reappearance of a man from her past. And she had a feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Chapter 3. The Lighthouse Keeper's Return. The phone call came the next morning, just as Evie was opening the bookstore. The sound of Mac's voice, deep and resonant, sent a shiver of anticipation through her. It was silly, she knew, to feel this way after so many years, but she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement that his call ignited. "Evie," he said, "I was hoping you might be free for lunch today. I'd like to talk to you about everything." Her heart skipped a beat. "Lunch?" she repeated, her voice surprisingly breathless. Yes, that would be lovely. They agreed to meet at the Salty Siren, the tavern she'd passed the previous evening. It wasn't fancy, but it was a Port Hope institution, known for its fresh seafood and its relaxed, friendly atmosphere. As Evie hung up the phone, she felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Excitement, certainly, but also trepidation. What did Mac want to talk about? What did his return mean for her carefully constructed life? She glanced at the framed photo on her desk, a picture of her and Thomas, smiling and carefree, taken years ago on a trip to Acadia National Park. A wave of guilt washed over her. Was it wrong to feel this spark for another man, even after all this time? She pushed the guilt aside, reminding herself that Thomas would have wanted her to be happy. He wouldn't have wanted her to live in the past, to cling to memories instead of embracing the present. When she arrived at the Salty Siren, Mac was already there, seated at a table by the window, overlooking the harbor. He rose as she approached, his eyes lighting up with that familiar, heart-stopping smile. "You look beautiful, Evie," he said, his voice soft and sincere. She blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Thank you, Mac," she said. "You look well." They sat down, and for a moment, an awkward silence hung between them. It was as if the years had created an invisible barrier, a wall of unspoken questions and unresolved emotions. Mac broke the silence, his gaze searching hers. "I know this is unexpected," he said. seeing each other again after all this time. But I wanted to explain why I'm here. Why I bought the lighthouse. Evie nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on his face, eager to hear his story. After I left the Navy, Mac began, his voice low and strained. I drifted for a while. I traveled the world, tried different jobs, but nothing seemed to fit. I was haunted by my past, by the things I'd seen, the things I'd done. He paused, his eyes clouding with a deep sadness. I lost my wife, Sarah. 2 years ago, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She was my anchor, my safe harbor. After she was gone, I felt completely lost. Evie's heart ached for him. She reached out and gently touched his hand, her fingers conveying the sympathy she couldn't express in words.
I'm so sorry, Mac, she said.
He nodded, his gaze fixed on their joined hands. After Sarah died, he continued, I started thinking about us. About our time together, here in Port Hope. About the lighthouse. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. The lighthouse was our place, he said. It was where we shared our dreams, our secrets, our first kiss. It was a symbol of hope, of a future that never happened. I remember, Evie said, her voice soft and filled with emotion. I realized that I needed to come back, Mac said. I needed to reconnect with that part of myself, with the boy I used to be, before everything changed. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the harbor. I bought the lighthouse because I want to restore it, he said. Not just the building itself, but also the memories. The hope. The sense of possibility that we felt back then. He looked back at Evie, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and uncertainty. I know it's a lot to ask, he said, but I was hoping maybe you could help me. You know this town, you know its history, and you understand what the lighthouse means to me. Evie stared at him, her mind reeling. His story, his pain, his vulnerability, touched her deeply. She saw, beneath the weathered exterior, the boy she had once loved, the boy who had dreamed of a future with her. And she realized, with a sudden clarity, that she wanted to help him. Not just because of their shared past, but because she saw in him a kindred spirit, a soul searching for healing, for redemption, for a second chance at happiness. I'd love to help, Mac, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. I'll do whatever I can. A slow smile spread across Mac's face, his eyes lighting up with gratitude. Thank you, Evie, he said. That means everything. As they ate their lunch, they talked not about the past, but about the future. They talked about the lighthouse, about their plans for its restoration, about their hopes for Harmony Springs. And as they talked, Evie felt a flicker of hope, a sense of possibility, a warmth that spread through her, chasing away the shadows of doubt and uncertainty. The lighthouse keeper had returned, and with him, he had brought a light, a spark, a promise of something new, something beautiful, something that might just change both of their lives forever. Chapter 4. Reading Between the Lines and Years. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Bound by the Sea, casting a warm glow on the shelves lined with books. Evie, ostensibly shelving new arrivals, found her gaze constantly drifting towards the street, watching for Mac's return. He'd promised to stop by after checking on the lighthouse, eager to discuss the restoration project with her. She hadn't realized how much the lighthouse project and Mac's presence had already begun to stir within her. It wasn't just the rekindling of old feelings, though that was certainly a part of it. It was also the sense of shared purpose, the excitement of embarking on a new adventure, the feeling of being needed. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. Evie turned, expecting to see Mac, but instead found her best friend, Martha, standing in the doorway, a knowing smirk on her face. So, Martha said, her voice dripping with playful sarcasm, "How was your lunch, with the long-lost love?" Evie blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her cheeks. "It was nice," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "We talked about the lighthouse." Martha raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "Just the lighthouse? Nothing about, 40 years of unspoken feelings?" Evie sighed, knowing that she couldn't hide anything from her best friend. It's complicated, Martha, she said. It's not like we can just pick up where we left off. Maybe not, Martha conceded, but you can't deny there's still something there. I saw the way you two looked at each other at the fundraiser. It was like a scene from one of your romance novels. Evie chuckled, despite herself.
You're exaggerating, she said.
Am I? Martha asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I think you're finally ready for a little excitement in your life, Ellie. And who better to provide it than a handsome, retired Navy captain with a penchant for rescuing damsels in distress and lighthouses. Evie shook her head, smiling. You're incorrigible, she said. And you're in denial, Martha retorted. But that's okay. I'll be here to remind you of your own desires, every step of the way. Before Evie could respond, the bell above the door chimed again, and this time, it was Mac. He stood in the doorway, his face lit by the afternoon sun, his eyes searching for her. Evie, he said, his voice warm and welcoming. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Evie said, her heart skipping a beat.
Come in.
Mac stepped into the bookstore, his gaze sweeping over the shelves lined with books. This is wonderful, Evie, he said. You've created a real haven here. Thank you, Evie said, her voice filled with pride. It's my little sanctuary. Martha, ever the matchmaker, cleared her throat. Well, I should be going, she said, her eyes darting between Evie and Mac. I have errands to run. Lots of single and fabulous errands. With a wink at Evie, Martha departed, leaving Evie and Mac alone in the bookstore. Mac turned to Evie, his expression serious. I've been thinking a lot about the lighthouse, he said. And I have an idea. I was hoping you could help me with it. Of course, Evie said, her heart fluttering with anticipation. What is it? I want to turn the lighthouse keeper's cottage into a small museum, Mac said. A place where we can showcase the history of the lighthouse, the town, and our story. Ellie's eyes widened in surprise. Our story? She repeated. Mac nodded. I found some old letters, he said. Letters we wrote to each other back in '68. I kept them all these years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather-bound box. He opened it, revealing a stack of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. I thought maybe we could include them in the museum, Mac said, his voice hesitant. Along with photos, artifacts, and other memorabilia. A way to tell the story of Port Hope, of U.S., of the lighthouse. Evie stared at the letters, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen those letters in decades, hadn't even thought about them. They were relics of a past she had tried to bury, a past filled with both joy and sorrow. I don't know, Mac, she said, her voice trembling slightly. That's a lot to put on display. It's very personal. I understand, Mac said, his gaze searching hers. But I think it's important. I think it's a story that needs to be told. A story of love, loss, and second chances. He paused, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. And I think, he added, his voice soft and tender, that it's a story that's not quite finished yet. Evie looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his emotion, the sincerity of his words. And she realized that he was right. Their story wasn't finished. It was just beginning. Okay, she said, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. Let's do it. Let's tell our story. A slow smile spread across Mac's face, his eyes lighting up with gratitude. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. And in that moment, surrounded by the silent stories of countless books, Evie and Mac embarked on a new chapter, a chapter filled with the promise of shared memories, rekindled feelings, and the possibility of a love that had waited patiently across the years for its chance to shine again. They were going to rewrite their ending. Chapter 4. Reading Between the Lines and Years. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Bound by the Sea, casting a warm glow on the shelves lined with books. Evie, ostensibly shelving new arrivals, found her gaze constantly drifting towards the street, watching for Mac's return. He'd promised to stop by after checking on the lighthouse, eager to discuss the restoration project with her. She hadn't realized how much the lighthouse project and Mac's presence had already begun to stir within her. It wasn't just the rekindling of old feelings, though that was certainly a part of it. It was also the sense of shared purpose, the excitement of embarking on a new adventure, the feeling of being needed. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. Evie turned, expecting to see Mac, but instead found her best friend, Martha, standing in the doorway, a knowing smirk on her face. "So," Martha said, her voice dripping with playful sarcasm, "how was your lunch, with the long-lost love?" Evie blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her cheeks. "It was nice," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "We talked about the lighthouse." Martha raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "Just the lighthouse? Nothing about, oh, I don't know, 40 years of unspoken feelings?" Evie sighed, knowing that she couldn't hide anything from her best friend. "It's complicated, Martha," she said. "It's not like we can just pick up where we left off." "Maybe not," Martha conceded, "but you can't deny there's still something there. I saw the way you two looked at each other at the fundraiser. It was like a scene from one of your romance novels." Evie chuckled, despite herself. "You're exaggerating," she said. "Am I?" Martha asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I think you're finally ready for a little excitement in your life, Ellie. And who better to provide it than a handsome, retired Navy captain with a penchant for rescuing damsels in distress and lighthouses?" Evie shook her head, smiling. "You're incorrigible," she said. "And you're in denial," Martha retorted. "But that's okay. I'll be here to remind you of your own desires, every step of the way." Before Evie could respond, the bell above the door chimed again, and this time, it was Mac. He stood in the doorway, his face lit by the afternoon sun, his eyes searching for her. "Evie," he said, his voice warm and welcoming, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Evie said, her heart skipping a beat.
"Come in."
Mac stepped into the bookstore, his gaze sweeping over the shelves lined with books. "This is wonderful, Evie," he said. "You've created a real haven here." "Thank you," Evie said, her voice filled with pride. "It's my little sanctuary." Martha, ever the matchmaker, cleared her throat. "Well, I should be going," she said, her eyes darting between Evie and Mac. "I have errands to run. Lots of single and fabulous errands." With a wink at Evie, Martha departed, leaving Evie and Mac alone in the bookstore. Mac turned to Evie, his expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about the lighthouse," he said. "And I have an idea. I was hoping you could help me with it." "Of course," Evie said, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "What is it?" "I want to turn the lighthouse keeper's cottage into a small museum," Mac said. "A place where we can showcase the history of a lighthouse, the town, and our story." Ellie's eyes widened in surprise. "Our story?" she repeated. Mac nodded. "I found some old letters," he said. "Letters we wrote to each other, back in '68. I kept them all these years." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather-bound box. He opened it, revealing a stack of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. "I thought maybe we could include them in the museum," Mac said, his voice hesitant. "Along with photos, artifacts, and other memorabilia. A way to tell the story of Port Hope, of U.S., of the lighthouse." Evie stared at the letters, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen those letters in decades, hadn't even thought about them. They were relics of a past she had tried to bury, a past filled with both joy and sorrow. "I don't know, Mac," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That's a lot to put on display. It's very personal." "I understand," Mac said, his gaze searching hers. "But I think it's important. I think it's a story that needs to be told. A story of love, loss, and second chances." He paused, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "And I think," he added, his voice soft and tender, "that it's a story that's not quite finished yet." Evie looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his emotion, the sincerity of his words. And she realized that he was right. Their story wasn't finished. It was just beginning. "Okay," she said, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "Let's do it. Let's tell her story." A slow smile spread across Mac's face, his eyes lighting up with gratitude. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. And in that moment, Surrounded by the silent stories of countless books, Evie and Mac embarked on a new chapter, a chapter filled with the promise of shared memories, rekindled feelings, and the possibility of a love that had waited patiently across the years for its chance to shine again. They were going to rewrite their ending. Chapter 6. Children of the Coastal Mist. The rekindled romance between Evie and Mac, while a source of immense joy for them, was met with a less than enthusiastic response from Evie's adult children, James Jr. and Emma. They arrived in Port Hope for a weekend visit, ostensibly to check on their mother, but in reality, to assess the situation and, in their minds, protect her from making a terrible mistake. James Jr., the elder sibling, a pragmatic and somewhat cynical lawyer, was the more vocal in his opposition. He viewed Mac as a relic from his mother's past, a distraction from her comfortable routine, and a potential threat to her financial security. Emma, a more sensitive and empathetic soul, a graphic designer living in Boston, was less overtly critical but harbored her own reservations. She worried about her mother's vulnerability, her tendency to romanticize the past, and her fear of change. She also, perhaps subconsciously, resented the idea of another man taking her father's place in Evie's life. The weekend visit was fraught with tension, awkward silences, and thinly veiled criticisms. James Jr. grilled Mac about his intentions, his finances, and his Navy career, his questions bordering on interrogation. Emma, while more subtle, peppered Evie with concerned inquiries, questioning her judgment, her sanity, and her ability to make sound decisions. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Emma asked one afternoon, as they were walking along the beach, the cool September wind whipping their hair. "You've been on your own for so long. Are you really ready for another relationship?" Evie sighed, kicking at the sand with her shoe. "I know it seems sudden," she said. "But it's not. Mac and we have a history. We understand each other." "But he's different," Emma persisted. "He's a Navy captain, a world traveler. You're a small-town bookstore owner. You live in different worlds. We're not that different, Emma," Evie said, her voice tinged with frustration. "We both love books. We both love the ocean. We both love this town. And we both love each other." Emma remained unconvinced. "I just don't want to see you get hurt, Mom," she said. "You've been through so much." "I know you're worried," Evie said, reaching out to touch her daughter's arm. "But I'm a grown woman. I can make my own decisions. And I'm choosing to be happy." That evening, during a tense family dinner at Mac's diner, James Jr. launched into a full-scale attack, questioning Mac's motives, his financial stability, and his suitability as a partner for their mother. "With all due respect, Mr. MacAlister," James Jr. said, his voice laced with sarcasm, "you're a bit of an unknown quantity. You reappear after 40 years, by a dilapidated lighthouse, and suddenly you're romancing my mother. It all seems a bit convenient." Mac, his face reddening, bristled at the accusation. "I assure you, James," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "my intentions are honorable. I love your mother, and I would never do anything to hurt her." "Love?" James Jr. scoffed. "You barely know her anymore. People change, Mr. MacAlister. 40 years is a long time." "Some things don't change, James," Evie interjected, her voice rising in defense of Mac. "Some feelings endure. And Mac and we have a connection that goes beyond time and distance." The argument escalated, voices rising, accusations flying, the air thick with tension and resentment. Evie, caught in the crossfire, felt her heart breaking. She had hoped for her children's understanding, their support, but instead, she was facing their disapproval, their suspicion, their fear. Finally, Mac stood up, his face pale, his hands trembling. "This is enough," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like a criminal. I love Evie, and I want to be with her, but I'm not going to force myself on her or on her family." He turned to Evie, his eyes filled with sadness. "I'm sorry, Evie," he said. "I didn't want to cause you any pain. I think it's best if I leave." With that, he walked out of the diner, leaving Evie, James Jr., and Emma staring after him in stunned silence. The children of the coastal mist, once united by their love for their mother, were now divided by their fears, their doubts, and their inability to see the enduring power of love. And the hope for it to come was fading too. The next plan was to find it. Chapter 7. A book club divided. The aftermath of the disastrous family dinner left Evie reeling. She felt torn between her love for Mac and her desire for her children's approval. She understood their concerns, their protective instincts, but she also resented their interference, their lack of faith in her judgment. She spent the next few days in a state of emotional turmoil, avoiding Mac, avoiding her children, and burying herself in the comforting routine of the bookstore. She found solace in the familiar scent of old books, the quiet murmur of turning pages, and the escapism offered by the stories within. But even the most captivating tales couldn't completely distract her from the ache in her heart, the emptiness that Mac's absence had created. She missed his smile, his laughter, his gentle touch. She missed their conversations, their shared dreams, their comfortable silences. She knew that she had to do something to bridge the gap between her children and Mac, to find a way to make them understand.
But she didn't know how.
The weekly meeting of the Port Hope Book Club, usually a source of comfort and camaraderie, offered little respite. The book club ladies, as they were affectionately known, were a diverse group of women, ranging in age from their 50s to their 70s, with a shared love of literature and a penchant for gossip. This week's meeting, held in Evie's bookstore, was particularly tense. The news of Mac's return, of his rekindled romance with Evie, and of the children's disapproval had spread through the town like wildfire, dividing the book club ladies into two camps, those who supported Evie and Mac, and those who sided with James Jr. and Emma. Martha, ever loyal to Evie, was the most vocal in her defense. "Honestly," she declared, her voice ringing through the bookstore, "I don't understand what the fuss is about. Evie's a grown woman. She can make her own decisions. And if she's happy with Mac, then we should be happy for her." Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher and a stickler for tradition, disagreed. "It's not that simple, Martha," she said. "Evie's children have a right to be concerned. They're just looking out for their mother's best interests. By trying to control her life?" Martha retorted. "By treating her like a child who can't be trusted to make her own choices?" The argument escalated, voices rising, accusations flying, the air thick with tension and disagreement. Evie, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, tried to mediate, to find common ground, but it was no use. The book club ladies were too entrenched in their positions, too caught up in their own opinions to listen to reason. As the meeting drew to a close, Evie felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had hoped for support, for understanding, but instead, she had found herself in the middle of another conflict, another battle. As the book club ladies filed out of the bookstore, Martha lingered behind, her expression concerned. "Are you all right, Ellie?" she asked, her voice soft and gentle. Evie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, Martha," she said. "I feel like I'm losing everyone. My children, my friends, everyone seems to be against us." "Don't say that," Martha said, her voice firm. "You have me. And you have Mac. And that's all that matters." She paused, her gaze searching Evie's. "You need to talk to him, Ellie," she said. "You need to tell him how you feel. And you need to make a decision. Are you going to let your children or anyone else dictate your happiness? Or are you going to fight for what you want?" Martha's words struck a chord within Evie. She knew that her friend was right. She couldn't let fear, doubt, or the opinions of others dictate her life. She had to make a choice. She had to decide what she truly wanted, and she had to fight for it. With a newfound resolve, Evie left the bookstore and walked towards the lighthouse, her heart pounding in her chest. The Septembe wind whipped her hair, the waves crashed against the shore, and the lighthouse beam cut through the gathering darkness. The time had come to finish this fight, to have her loved ones understand that life was worth to be happy with, and no one else was able to. Chapter 8. George's Gambit. As Evie approached the lighthouse, she saw a figure standing on the Widow's Walk, silhouetted against the darkening sky. It wasn't Mac. It was George, the town council member and Evie's rival suitor, as Martha so delicately put it. George had been a persistent, if somewhat unwelcome, presence in Evie's life since Thomas's death. He was a widower, a successful businessman, and a pillar of the Port Hope community. He was also, in Evie's opinion, rather dull, overly opinionated, and utterly lacking in charm. He had made his intentions towards Evie clear on numerous occasions, showering her with gifts, inviting her to dinner, and constantly reminding her of his eligibility. Evie had politely but firmly rebuffed his advances, making it clear that she wasn't interested in a romantic relationship. But George was not one to take no for an answer. He persisted, believing that he could eventually wear her down, convince her that he was the best option for her, the safe and sensible choice. Seeing him standing there, on the widow's walk of Mac's lighthouse, sent a shiver of unease down Evie's spine. What was he doing there? And why did she have a feeling that his presence boded ill? As she reached the base of the lighthouse, George descended the stairs, his face lit by a smug smile. "Evie," he said, his voice oozing with false concern, "I was hoping I'd find you here. I need to talk to you." Evie, her guard up, forced a polite smile. "What is it, George?" she asked. "It's about Mac," George said, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "I'm worried about him, Evie. I think he's unstable." Evie's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "I've been doing some research," George said, his voice taking on a self-important tone. "I've looked into his military record, his medical history, and I've discovered some disturbing things." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, his gaze fixed on Evie's face, waiting for her reaction. "Mac is suffering from PTSD, Evie," George continued. "He's been having nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks. He's a danger to himself and to others." Evie's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that Mac had struggled with his past, with the trauma of the war. But she had never seen him as dangerous. He was kind, gentle, compassionate. He would never hurt anyone. "I don't believe you, George," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're just trying to scare me. You're trying to turn me against him." George shook his head, his expression feigning sympathy. "I'm just trying to protect you, Evie," he said. "I care about you. I don't want to see you get hurt." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. Evie recoiled, her skin crawling at his touch. "Don't touch me, George," she said, her voice filled with disgust. "And don't ever talk about Mac like that again." She turned to leave, but George grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You're making a mistake, Evie," he said, his voice hardening. "Mac is not the man you think he is. He's damaged goods. He'll only bring you pain." Evie struggled to free herself from his grasp, her anger rising to a boil. "Let go of me, George," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You're hurting me." "I'm doing this for your own good, Evie," George insisted, his grip tightening. "You need to listen to me. You need to stay away from Mac." Just as Evie was about to scream, a voice cut through the air, a voice filled with fury and authority. "Let her go, George." It was Mac. He stood at the entrance to the lighthouse, his face a mask of rage, his eyes blazing with anger. He strode towards them, his fists clenched, his body radiating a barely contained violence. George, startled by Mac's sudden appearance, released Evie's arm. He stepped back, his face paling, his smug confidence replaced by a flicker of fear. He'd been here before, and would not find the same joy of violence he may have faced before. The time has come for true judgment. "Mac," George stammered, trying to regain his composure. "I was just talking to Evie. I heard what you were saying," George, Mac said, his voice low and menacing. "And I'm telling you to stay away from her. Stay away from me. And stay away from our lighthouse." He stepped closer to George, his body looming over him, his eyes filled with a cold, hard fury. "If you ever touch her again, if you ever say another word against her, if you ever even look at her the wrong way, I swear to God, I will make you regret it." George, cowed by Mac's fury, backed away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "All right, Mac," he said, his voice trembling. "I understand. I'll leave you alone. He turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Evie and Mac standing alone, beneath the watchful beam of the lighthouse. The gambit had failed, the truth revealed, and the love that bound Evie and Mac, once again, stood strong against the shadows. Now, the lighthouse shall be their fortress and their strength. Chapter 9. Letters from the Sea. The confrontation with George left Evie shaken but also strangely exhilarated. Seeing Mac's fierce protectiveness, his unwavering defense of her, reignited a spark within her, a reminder of the deep connection they shared. Mac, his anger slowly subsiding, turned to Evie, his face filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Did he hurt you?" Evie shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just shaken up." He reached out and gently touched her arm, his fingers tracing the red marks left by George's grip. "I'm sorry, Evie," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "I shouldn't have left you alone. I should have known he'd try something like this." "It's not your fault, Mac," Evie said, her voice soft and reassuring. "You couldn't have known." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the crashing of the waves against the shore and the rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam. The tension gradually eased, replaced by a sense of shared relief and a renewed intimacy. "Let's go inside," Mac said, his voice gentle.
I'll make us some tea.
They entered the lighthouse, the cool, stone interior a welcome contrast to the emotionally charged atmosphere outside. Mac led her to the keeper's cottage, a small, cozy space that he had begun to transform into a comfortable living area. As Mac busied himself with preparing the tea, Evie wandered around the cottage, her gaze drawn to the objects that filled the room. There were nautical charts, antique instruments, and framed photographs of lighthouses from around the world. On a small table, she noticed a stack of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. They were the letters they had exchanged during their youth, the letters they had planned to include in the Lighthouse Museum. She picked up the stack, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. She hesitated for a moment, then untied the ribbon and began to read. As she read through the letters, she was transported back in time, to the summer of '68, to the carefree days of their youth, to the passionate intensity of their first love. She read of their dreams, their hopes, their fears, their unwavering belief in a future together. She came across a letter that Mac had written to her from Vietnam, a letter filled with pain, longing, and a desperate plea for her to wait for him. "My dearest Ellie girl," he had written, "I miss you more than words can say. This war is hell, and I don't know if I'll ever be the same. But thinking of you, of our love, of our future together, that's what keeps me going. Please wait for me, Ellie.
Please don't forget me."
Tears welled up in Evie's eyes as she read those words. She had forgotten the depth of his pain, the intensity of his love, the sacrifices he had made. She had let time, distance, and her own fears cloud her memories. She heard Mac's footsteps behind her. She turned, her face streaked with tears, the letter clutched in her hand. "I'm sorry, Mac," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I shouldn't have read these. They're private." Mac stepped closer, his gaze filled with tenderness. "It's okay, Evie," he said. "There are letters. They're part of our story." He reached out and gently took the letter from her hand. He looked at it, his expression filled with a mixture of sadness and nostalgia. "I wrote that letter after the ambush," he said, his voice low and strained. "I thought I was going to die, and all I could think about was you." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I never stopped loving you, Evie," he said. "Not for a single day. Even when I was with Sarah, a part of my heart always belonged to you." Evie's tears flowed freely now, tears of grief, tears of regret, tears of joy. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I never stopped loving you either, Mac," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to find my way back to you." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tight. They stood there, embraced in the silence of the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the letters from the sea a testament to their enduring love, a bridge across the years, a promise of a future finally within their grasp. The storm had passed, the darkness had receded, and the light, once dimmed, now shone brighter than ever before. Their journey had come to what would be for everyone else. Chapter 10. The Captain's Confession. The shared intimacy of reading their old letters, coupled with the emotional confrontation with George, had stripped away any remaining pretense or hesitation between Evie and Mac. They were left with the raw, undeniable truth of their feelings, a love that had endured the passage of time, distance, and the inevitable scars of life. As the evening deepened, they sat together in the lighthouse keeper's cottage, a small fire crackling in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They talked, not of the past, but of the present, of their fears, their hopes, and their dreams for the future. Mac, emboldened by Evie's vulnerability and his own growing sense of peace, decided to share a secret he had kept buried for decades, a secret that had haunted him since his return from Vietnam. "There's something I need to tell you, Evie," he said, his voice low and strained. "Something I've never told anyone." Evie looked at him, her heart filled with concern. She reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You can tell me anything, Mac," she said. "I'm here for you." He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fire. "It's about the ambush," he said. "About the day I lost so many of my men." Evie squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with understanding. She knew how difficult it was for him to talk about the war, how deeply the memories affected him. "I wasn't a hero, Evie," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake. I made a bad call, and it cost the lives of my men." He paused, his eyes clouding with pain and guilt. "For years I blamed myself," he said. "I carried that burden, that guilt, that shame. I thought I didn't deserve to be happy, to find love, to have a normal life." Evie's heart ached for him. She could see the pain etched on his face, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "It wasn't your fault, Mac," she said, her voice filled with compassion. "It's unpredictable. You can't blame yourself for what happened." Mac shook his head. "But I do, Evie," he said. "I always have. And I always will." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "I need you to know this, Evie," he said. "I need you to know the truth about me. I'm not the perfect man you think I am. I'm flawed, I'm damaged, and I'm haunted by my past." Evie reached out and gently cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs tracing the lines of worry etched around his eyes. "I know you're not perfect, Mac," she said, her voice soft and tender. "None of us are. But that doesn't change the way I feel about you. It doesn't change the fact that I love you." She paused, her gaze searching his. "Your past doesn't define you, Mac," she said. "It's a part of you, but it's not all of you. You're a good man, a kind man, a loving man. And that's what matters." Mac's eyes welled up with tears, tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears of love. He leaned forward and kissed her a long, slow, tender kiss that spoke volumes. As they broke apart, Mac smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and warmed Evie's heart. "Thank you, Evie," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "For seeing me, for accepting me, for loving me. Always, Mac," she whispered, her voice filled with unwavering love. "Always." The captain's confession had cleared the air, removing the final barrier between them. They had shared their deepest fears, their darkest secrets, their most profound vulnerabilities. And in doing so, they had forged a bond that was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than ever before. As the fire died down, casting long shadows on the walls, Evie and Mac held each other close, their hearts filled with a sense of peace, of belonging, of a love that had finally come home. The lighthouse, once a symbol of loss and regret, now stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of love and forgiveness. They were ready for the world, or to give their lives to one. Chapter 11. Storms and Safe Harbors. The peace that followed Mac's confession was not to last. Just as their love had weathered the internal storms of their past, An external tempest was brewing, threatening to test the strength of their newly fortified bond. The weather, as if mirroring the emotional turbulence brewing beneath the surface of Harmony Springs, took a turn for the worse. A fierce nor'easter, rare for September, descended upon the Maine coast, bringing with it howling winds, torrential rain, and waves that crashed against the shore with ferocious intensity. The town, battening down the hatches, prepared for the onslaught. Businesses closed, windows were boarded up, and boats were secured in the harbor. The lighthouse, standing sentinel against the raging storm, became a focal point of both anxiety and reassurance. Evie and Mac, after securing the bookstore and the diner, found themselves huddled together in the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the wind screaming outside, the rain lashing against the windows. The power flickered, then died, plunging them into darkness, the only light source the rhythmic flash of the lighthouse beam. As the storm raged, a sense of unease settled over Evie. It wasn't just the ferocity of the weather that troubled her. It was also the lingering feeling that Colonel Davies hadn't truly given up, that he was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Do you think he'll try something?" Evie asked, her voice barely audible above the roar of the wind. Mac, his arm around her, pulled her close. "I don't know, Evie," he said. "But we have to be prepared. We can't let him win." They spent the night huddled together, listening to the storm, sharing stories, and drawing strength from each other's presence. As the hours passed, Evie's anxiety began to subside, replaced by a sense of calm, a sense of trust in Mac, in their love, and in their ability to weather any storm together. Just as dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky with streaks of pale gray, the storm reached its peak. A monstrous wave, larger than any Evie had ever seen, crashed against the base of the lighthouse, sending a tremor through the entire structure. The lighthouse beacon flickered, then died, plunging them into complete darkness. "What happened?" Evie cried, her heart leaping with fear. "The generator must have failed," Max said, his voice grim. "I need to go check it out." He grabbed a flashlight and started towards the door, but Evie stopped him, her hand gripping his arm. "No, Mac," she said, her voice filled with terror. "It's too dangerous. You can't go out there." "I have to, Evie," Max said, his voice firm. "The lighthouse is our responsibility. We can't let it go dark." He kissed her forehead, his touch reassuring. "I'll be careful," he said. "I promise." With that, he disappeared into the storm, leaving Evie alone in the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind filled with images of crashing waves, treacherous winds, and Mac, lost in the tempest. She waited, praying for a safe return, her anxiety growing with each passing moment. The silence, broken only by the howling wind and the crashing waves, was deafening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard footsteps on the stairs. She held her breath, her heart leaping with hope. It was Mac. He was soaked to the bone, his face pale and drawn, but he was alive. "I fixed it," he said, his voice hoarse. "The generator's back on. The lights shining again." Evie rushed into his arms, holding him tight, her relief overwhelming. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I was so worried." As they stood there, embraced in the darkness of the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the storm slowly began to subside. The wind died down, the rain softened, and the waves, though still turbulent, lost their ferocious intensity. The lighthouse beam, now shining steadily, cut through the dissipating storm clouds, a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience, a testament to their enduring love. They had weathered the storm together, and they had emerged stronger, their bond forged in the crucible of adversity. But they knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that the calm was only temporary, that the darkness still lurked, and that their battle was far from over. The safe harbor was there, but still out of reach. Chapter 12. The Weight of the World. The nor'easter, while devastating in its intensity, ultimately served to strengthen the bonds within the Harmony Springs community. Neighbors helped neighbors, sharing resources, offering support, and working together to clean up the debris and repair the damage. The lighthouse, though battered, had survived, its beacon a symbol of resilience and hope. Mac, hailed as a hero for his bravery in restoring the light, became an even more revered figure in the town. But the storm had also exposed a deeper vulnerability, a fragility that lay beneath the surface of their idyllic existence. The power outage, the damage to homes and businesses, and the near loss of the lighthouse had served as a stark reminder of their dependence on the outside world, on the forces of nature, and on the whims of fate. For Evie, the storm had also brought a renewed sense of urgency, a heightened awareness of the challenges that still lay ahead. She knew that Colonel Davies was still out there, plotting his revenge, waiting for an opportunity to strike. She also knew that the threat of climate change, the issue that Lily had been so passionate about, was a real and present danger, one that could devastate coastal communities like Harmony Springs. She began to feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, the responsibility for protecting her town, her loved ones, and the fragile beauty of the environment that surrounded them. One afternoon, as she was walking along the beach, collecting driftwood for a new art project, she saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, staring out at the ocean. It was George, the town council member who had tried to sabotage her relationship with Mac. He looked defeated. His usual smug confidence was gone, replaced by a sadness, a vulnerability that Evie had never seen before. She hesitated for a moment, then walked towards him, her heart filled with a mixture of apprehension and compassion. "George?" she said, her voice soft. He looked up, his eyes startled. "Evie," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," Evie said, sitting down beside him on the bench. He sighed, his gaze returning to the ocean. I don't know," he said. "I just needed to get away. To think." Evie remained silent, letting him speak when he was ready. "I messed up, Evie," George said, his voice filled with remorse. "I let my ambition, my jealousy, my stupidity get the better of me. I try to hurt you, I try to hurt Mac, and I ended up hurting the whole town." He paused, his eyes welling up with tears. "I lost everything," he said. "My reputation, my business, my friends. Even my wife, she left me." Evie's heart ached for him. She had never liked George, had never trusted him, but she couldn't deny the pain he was feeling. "I'm sorry, George," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I know it's not easy." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "Can you ever forgive me, Evie?" he asked. "Can you ever give me another chance?" Evie hesitated. She knew that forgiveness was important, that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison her own soul. But she also knew that trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild. "I can forgive you, George," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "But I can't forget. And I can't promise you anything. You need to earn back the trust of this community. You need to prove that you've changed." George nodded, his head bowed in shame. "I know," he said. "And I will. I'll do whatever it takes." As Evie walked away from George, she felt a sense of closure, a sense of having released a burden that she had been carrying for too long. She had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for her own. But the weight of the world remained, the responsibility for protecting Harmony Springs, for fighting for its future, for ensuring that the darkness that still lurked in the shadows would not prevail. She knew that she couldn't do it alone. She needed Mac, she needed Lily, she needed the entire community to stand together, to fight for what they believed in, to protect what they held dear. The world had become a lot heavier, but as long as they stood together, then no gravity could be strong enough. Chapter 13. A Light in the Darkness. The encounter with George, while ultimately cathartic, left Evie with a renewed sense of vulnerability. The weight of responsibility, the constant threat of Colonel Davies, and the looming specter of climate change, it all felt overwhelming at times. She found herself seeking solace in the lighthouse, drawn to its strength, its steadfastness, its unwavering beam of light. She would often climb the winding stairs to the lantern room, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of the ocean, her mind searching for answers, for guidance, for hope. One evening, as a storm brewed on the horizon, mirroring the turmoil within her, she found herself standing on the widow's walk, the wind whipping her hair, the salty spray stinging her face. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, a longing for something she couldn't quite define. As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, she heard a voice, faint and ethereal, whispering on the wind. "Don't give up, Eleanor," the voice said. "You are stronger than you think. You have the power to make a difference." Evie looked around, searching for the source of the voice, but she saw nothing. She was alone, on the widow's walk, surrounded by the gathering storm. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The voice answered, clearer this time, closer.
"It is I, Lorelei,
the spirit of the sea. I have been watching you, Eleanor. I have seen your courage, your compassion, your unwavering commitment to protecting this town." Evie gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard the legends of Lorelei, the sea breeze siren, but she had never truly believed in them. Now, standing on the widow's walk, facing the storm, she was hearing the siren's voice, her words filled with wisdom and encouragement. I don't understand," Evie stammered. "Why are you talking to me?" "Because you are the one, Eleanor," Lorelei said. "You are the one who can save Harmony Springs. You are the one who can heal the planet." Evie shook her head, her mind reeling. "I'm not a hero, Lorelei," she said. "I'm just an ordinary woman." "You are more than you know, Eleanor," Lorelei said. "You have the heart of a lioness, the spirit of a warrior, and the love of 1,000 mothers. You have the power to inspire, to unite, to create change." She paused, her voice growing stronger, more urgent. "But you must be brave, Eleanor," she said. "You must be fearless. You must face the darkness, and you must never give up." As Lorelei's words faded into the wind, Evie felt a surge of strength, a renewed sense of purpose. She was not alone. She had the spirit of the sea on her side, and she would not fail. She descended the stairs, her heart filled with determination. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that she would face challenges, obstacles, and setbacks. But she also knew that she had the power to overcome them, to make a difference, to create a better future for Harmony Springs, for the planet, and for the generations to come. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw Mac waiting for her, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right, Evie?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "I saw you standing up there in the storm. I was afraid for you." Evie smiled, her eyes shining with newfound confidence. "I'm fine, Mac," she said. "Better than fine. I've found my purpose. I know what I need to do." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "We need to fight, Mac," she said. "We need to fight for our town, for our planet, for our future. And we need to do it together." Mac nodded, his gaze filled with unwavering support. "We will, Evie," he said. "We'll face whatever comes, together. We always have and we always will." As they stood there, hand in hand, beneath the watchful beam of the lighthouse, Evie felt a sense of peace, of belonging, of a love that transcended time, distance, and even the boundaries of the physical world. She was ready. They were ready. The light in the darkness had shown them the way, and they would follow it, wherever it might lead. Their way was found, and there was only one way to go now. Chapter 14. The Widow's Walk. The conversation with Lorelei's spirit solidified Evie's resolve, transforming her anxiety into a steely determination. She knew that the challenges facing Harmony Springs were immense, but she also knew that she, along with Mac and the community, possessed the strength and resilience to overcome them. The immediate threat remained Colonel Davies. While he had seemingly backed down, Evie didn't trust his sudden change of heart. She suspected he was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike, to exploit any weakness, any vulnerability. She and Mac decided to take proactive measures. They contacted a private investigator, a former colleague of Mac's from his Navy days, asking him to look into Colonel Davies' background, his business dealings, and his connections to Burger Bliss. They also strengthened their ties with the local law enforcement, sharing their concerns with Sergeant Miller and urging him to keep a close watch on Davies and his associates. The group of veterans that now had ties to the town would also continue the watch. While these precautions offered a degree of security, Evie knew that true safety lay in uniting the community, in strengthening their collective resolve, and in preparing them for whatever Davies might throw their way. She decided to use her art as a tool for communication, for inspiration, and for mobilization. She began to create a series of paintings depicting scenes of Harmony Springs' beauty, its resilience, and its unwavering spirit. She painted the lighthouse, standing tall against a stormy sky, its beam a symbol of hope and guidance. She painted the townspeople, their faces filled with determination, their hands joined in unity. She painted the ocean, its vastness and power a reminder of the forces of nature that they had to respect and protect. Her paintings, displayed in prominent locations throughout the town, resonated with the community, reminding them of what they were fighting for, of what they stood to lose, and of what they could achieve together. One evening, as Evie was working on a new painting in her studio, she received a visit from Lily, her face etched with concern. "Evie," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need your help. I've discovered something disturbing." Evie, her heart pounding with apprehension, put down her brush and turned to face Lily.
"What is it?"
she asked. Lily explained that she had been researching the environmental impact of fast food chains, and she had uncovered evidence that Burger Bliss had a history of violating environmental regulations, polluting waterways, and destroying natural habitats. "They're not just a threat to Mac's Diner," Lily said, her voice filled with anger. "They're a threat to the entire ecosystem. They're a threat to our way of life." Evie's blood ran cold. She had known that Burger Bliss was a greedy corporation, but she hadn't realized the extent of their destructive practices. "We have to stop them, Lily," Evie said, her voice filled with determination. "We have to expose them. We have to make people aware of what they're doing." They decided to share Lily's findings with the community, to organize a public awareness campaign, and to pressure the town council to reconsider their support for Burger Bliss, even if that support had supposedly ended. They knew that they were facing a powerful adversary, a corporation with deep pockets and a team of ruthless lawyers. But they also knew that they had truth, justice, and the support of their community on their side. As Evie stood on the widow's walk of the lighthouse, the wind whipping her hair, the waves crashing against the shore, she felt a surge of strength, a renewed sense of purpose. She was not alone. She had Mac, she had Lily, she had the entire community of Harmony Springs standing with her. And she had the spirit of Lorelei, the sea breeze siren, guiding her, protecting her, and empowering her to fight for what she believed in. The Widow's Walk, once a place of loneliness and longing, had become a symbol of strength, of resilience, and of unwavering hope. She was ready to face the darkness, to embrace the light, and to lead her community towards a brighter future. This walk of theirs was far from over, but if the destination stayed true, they could find a new home in it together. Chapter 15. Carving new paths. Lily's research provided the ammunition Evie and Mac needed. They meticulously compiled the evidence, organizing reports, gathering photographs, and preparing a presentation that would expose Burger Bliss's environmental record to the public. They decided to hold a town meeting, inviting all the residents of Harmony Springs, the town council members, and representatives from the local media. They knew that they had to make a strong case, to present irrefutable evidence, and to convince the community that Burger Bliss was not the savior they had been led to believe. The meeting was held in the newly restored Harmony Springs Hotel Ballroom, a grand space that had once hosted lavish parties and community events. The room was packed, standing room only, with concerned citizens, eager reporters, and a handful of stony-faced Burger Bliss representatives. Evie, standing on the stage beside Mac and Lily, felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew that this was their chance, their opportunity to expose the truth, to protect their town, and to fight for their future. Lily began the presentation, her voice clear and strong, her passion for the environment evident in every word. She presented the evidence of Burger Bliss's environmental violations, detailing the specific incidents, the locations, and the devastating consequences for the ecosystems they had damaged. She showed photographs of polluted waterways, of deforested landscapes, and of wildlife struggling to survive in the wake of Burger Bliss's destructive practices. She shared stories of communities that had been harmed by the corporation's greed, their livelihoods destroyed, their health compromised, their environment irrevocably damaged. The audience listened intently, their faces filled with shock, anger, and a growing sense of betrayal. They had been told that Burger Bliss would bring economic prosperity to Harmony Springs, but they were now learning that this prosperity came at a terrible cost. Next, Mac spoke, his voice filled with emotion. He shared his personal story, his love for Harmony Springs, his commitment to preserving its history, its identity, and its soul. He spoke of his family's legacy, of the generations who had lived and worked in this town, and of his unwavering determination to protect it from corporate greed. "We're not against progress," Mac said, his voice ringing through the ballroom. "But we believe that progress should not come at the expense of our environment, our community, or our values. We believe that we can have economic development without sacrificing our soul." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, connecting with the faces of the townspeople. "We're asking you to stand with us," he said. "We're asking you to fight for what you believe in. We're asking you to protect Harmony Springs." Finally, Evie stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She held up one of her paintings, a vibrant depiction of the Harmony Springs coastline, its pristine beaches, its sparkling waters, and its abundant wildlife. "This is what we're fighting for," she said, her voice filled with passion. "This is what we stand to lose. We can't let Burger Bliss destroy our home. We can't let them pollute our waters, destroy our landscapes, and ruin our way of life." She paused, her gaze fixed on the town council members. "We're asking you to reconsider your decision," she said. "We're asking you to choose community over greed, to choose sustainability over short-term profits, to choose the future of Harmony Springs over the interests of a corporation that doesn't care about us." As Evie finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. The townspeople, their faces filled with determination, stood to their feet, their voices echoing through the ballroom. The town council members, looking uncomfortable and ashamed, shifted in their seats. They had been exposed, their corruption revealed, their allegiance to Burger Bliss challenged. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of hope, a feeling that the tide had turned, that the community was united, and that they had a chance to win this fight. Evie, Mac, and Lily had carved new paths that led away from corporate greed and towards a sustainable, community-focused future. But the journey was far from over, and the shadows of the past still lingered, waiting for an opportunity to strike. What new turn will they take? Chapter 16. Fear, regret, and promises. The public outcry following the town meeting forced the town council to schedule a special session to reconsider their previous decision regarding Burger Bliss. The intervening days were a blur of activity for Evie and Mac. They worked tirelessly, organizing protests, circulating petitions, and speaking to the media, keeping the pressure on the council members and ensuring that the community's voice was heard. However, beneath the surface of their determined efforts, a current of fear and uncertainty flowed. Colonel Davies, though silent since his initial offer to Mac, remained a looming threat. His connection to Burger Bliss, his ruthless ambition, and his history with Mac cast a long shadow over their efforts. One evening, as Evie and Mac were working late at the diner, preparing for another day of campaigning, Mac received a phone call. His face paled as he listened, his hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What is it, Mac?" Evie asked, her heart pounding with apprehension. Mac hung up the phone, his gaze fixed on the floor. That was Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He said Davies is planning something. Something big." Evie's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He wouldn't say," Mac said, his voice filled with frustration. "He just said that Davies is desperate, that he's not going to give up, and that we need to be careful." They spent the rest of the evening in anxious silence, their minds racing, trying to anticipate Davies's next move. They knew that he was capable of anything, that he wouldn't hesitate to use violence, intimidation, or any other means necessary to achieve his goals. As they lay in bed that night, sleep eluded Evie. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of Davies, of Burger Bliss, of the destruction they could wreak on Harmony Springs. She thought of Mac, of his vulnerability, of his past trauma, of the burden he carried. She feared for his safety, for his well-being, for the future they were trying to build together. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I'm scared, Mac," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mac squeezed her hand, his touch reassuring. "I know, Evie," he said. "I am too. But we can't let fear control us. We have to stay strong. We have to keep fighting." "But what if we lose?" Evie asked, her voice barely audible. "What if Davies wins? What if we lose everything?" Mac pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tight. "We won't lose, Evie," he said, his voice firm. "We have each other. We have our community. And we have the truth on our side. That's all we need." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I made a promise to you, Evie," he said. "A promise to protect you, to protect our town, to protect our future. And I'm not going to break that promise. No matter what." Evie looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his love, the unwavering strength of his commitment. And she knew, with a certainty that warmed her to her core, that he was right. They would face whatever came their way, together. They would fight for what they believed in, and they would never give up. But as she drifted off to sleep, a lingering doubt remained, a whisper of fear that she couldn't quite silence. She knew that Davies was a formidable opponent, a man driven by greed and ambition, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And she knew that the battle for Harmony Springs was far from over. Regret could creep back. Fear, always, may make its return. However, for now they have made promises, and they would see it to the end, no matter the cost. Chapter 17. Letting it go. The day of the special town council session arrived, carrying with it an atmosphere of tense anticipation. The town hall was packed, overflowing with residents, reporters, and a contingent of Burger Bliss representatives, their faces smug and confident. Evie and Mac, standing at the front of the room, felt the weight of the community's expectations pressing down on them. They had done everything they could, they had rallied support, they had exposed the truth, but they knew that the final decision rested with the town council. The meeting began with a restatement of Burger Bliss's proposal, presented by a new lawyer, a woman even more polished and persuasive than Ms. Harding. She reiterated the economic benefits, the jobs, the tax revenue, skillfully sidestepping the environmental concerns and community opposition. Then it was Evie and Mac's turn to speak. They reiterated their arguments, reminding the council members of the town's history, its identity, and its soul. They spoke of the importance of preserving their community, of protecting their environment, and of choosing a sustainable future over short-term profits. But as they spoke, Evie noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The council members, who had previously seemed conflicted, now appeared resolute, their faces set in expressions of determination. The mayor, his gaze unwavering, cleared his throat. "We have heard from both sides," he said, his voice clear and strong. "And we have carefully considered all the evidence. We have also listened to the voices of our community." He paused, his eyes meeting Evie and Mac's. "We have reached a decision," he said. "The town council has voted to uphold our previous decision. We will approve Burger Bliss's proposal." A gasp of disbelief and outrage swept through the room. The townspeople, their faces filled with shock and anger, began to protest, their voices rising in a chorus of dissent. Evie and Mac, their hearts sinking with despair, felt a wave of defeat wash over them. They had fought so hard, they had given it their all, but it wasn't enough. The power of corporate greed had prevailed, crushing their hopes and shattering their dreams. But before the chaos could escalate, Daniel stepped forward, his hand raised, silencing the crowd. "Wait," he said, his voice firm and commanding. "There's something you all need to know." He turned to the town council members, his gaze filled with accusation. "You made your decision based on lies," he said. "You were bribed, you were manipulated, and you betrayed the trust of your community." He produced a folder, filled with documents, photographs, and recordings. "I have evidence," he said, "evidence that proves that Burger Bliss, in collusion with Colonel Davies, engaged in illegal activities, offering bribes to certain council members, intimidating local residents, and sabotaging our efforts to protect Harmony Springs." He handed the folder to the mayor, his gaze unwavering. "I urge you to review this evidence," he said. "And I urge you to do the right thing. For once in your lives, do the right thing." The mayor, his face pale and drawn, took the folder, his hands trembling. He looked at the other council members, his eyes pleading for guidance. They looked back at him, their faces filled with shame and fear. The room fell silent, the tension palpable, the fate of Harmony Springs hanging in the balance. Evie and Mac held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests, praying for a miracle, praying for justice, praying for the truth to prevail. Then Evie decided that maybe it was time for another approach. That maybe it was all a lie. All for her dreams to see the light, only to lose sight on what matters most. She walked out of the town hall and back to the diner, where she may live to grow, and hopefully to move forward. As what could she really give? She may not see it, but she did not do this alone. If it meant the whole town. And so, they all lived on. But that did not come true. All that hope was never as what was meant to come. It did change them, and make them new. And all in a time that had. So what could be? If it was going to be what matters, she would. They knew what love meant. They just had a bad day again. Chapter 18. The Heart Knows. Evie's departure from the town hall was not an act of surrender, but a strategic retreat. The weight of recent events, the betrayal by the council, and the seemingly insurmountable power of Burger Bliss and Colonel Davies had taken their toll. She needed time to think, to regroup, and to find a new way forward. Returning to the diner, she found solace in its familiar surroundings, in the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the comforting hum of the refrigerator. She sat at the counter, her gaze fixed on the empty stools, her mind replaying the events of the past few weeks. She had fought so hard, she had given it her all, but it seemed that it wasn't enough. She had lost. Mac had lost. Harmony Springs had lost. A wave of despair washed over her, threatening to drown her in its depths. She felt a tear roll down her cheek, followed by another and another. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. But as she wept, she felt a flicker of something else, a spark of defiance, a refusal to give up. She remembered Lorelai's words, "You are stronger than you think. You have the power to make a difference." She lifted her head, wiping away her tears. She wouldn't let despair consume her. She wouldn't let Davies and Burger Bliss win. She would find another way, a way to fight back, a way to protect her town, her love, her future. She thought of Mac, of his unwavering strength, his gentle kindness, his enduring love. She thought of the townspeople, their resilience, their spirit, their unwavering commitment to their community. And she thought of the lighthouse, standing tall against the storms, its beam a symbol of hope, a beacon of guidance. An idea began to form in her mind, a daring, unconventional, perhaps even crazy idea. But it was an idea that resonated with her heart, an idea that felt right. She reached for the phone, her fingers dialing a familiar number. It was Lily, her voice filled with concern, answering on the other end. "Evie, are you all right? What happened at the meeting?" Evie took a deep breath, her voice steady and determined. "I need your help, Lily," she said. "I have a plan." She explained her idea to Lily, outlining the steps they would need to take, the risks they would need to face, and the potential rewards they could reap. Lily listened intently, her initial skepticism gradually replaced by a growing excitement. "It's bold, Evie," she said, "but it might just work." "We have nothing to lose, Lily," Evie said, her voice filled with conviction. "And everything to gain." They spent the rest of the afternoon formulating their plan, gathering information, and contacting allies. They knew that they were facing a formidable opponent, but they were also confident that they had the strength, the courage, and the support of their community to succeed. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Harmony Springs, Evie and Lily stood on the beach, their gazes fixed on the lighthouse. The waves crashed against the shore, the wind whipped their hair, and the lighthouse beams swept across the darkening sky. "Are you ready?" Lily asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Evie smiled, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said. They turned and walked towards the lighthouse, their steps determined, their hearts united in a common purpose. The heart knew what it wanted, and it was time to listen, to trust, and to act. The battle for Harmony Springs was far from over, and a new chapter, a chapter filled with daring risks and unwavering hope, was about to begin. What has happened did matter, but there has to be more to what would come from the sea. What all that hope may shine for all who seek a new world. Chapter 19. Dancing New Love. Evie and Lily's plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was born of desperation and fueled by a fierce love for their town. They intended to use the very symbol of Harmony Springs, the lighthouse, against those who sought to exploit it. Their research had revealed a little-known clause in the town's charter, a provision dating back to the 18th century, granting the lighthouse keeper extraordinary powers in times of imminent peril to the coastline. The clause, designed to protect against pirates and smugglers, had never been invoked in modern times, and its legal validity was questionable. But Evie and Lily were counting on the element of surprise and the moral weight of their cause to carry them through. Under the cover of darkness, they made their way to the lighthouse, Mac joining them, his presence a source of strength and reassurance. The town was quiet, unaware of the drama about to unfold. As they climbed the winding stairs to the lantern room, Evie felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She knew that they were taking a huge risk, that they could face legal repercussions, even arrest. But she also knew that they had to try, that they had to do everything in their power to protect their home. Reaching the lantern room, they set their plan in motion. Lily, with her technical expertise, disabled the automated light control system, replacing it with a makeshift manual override. Mac, drawing on his Navy experience, adjusted the Fresnel lens, focusing the beam not out to sea, but inland, towards the town hall. Evie, her heart pounding in her chest, took a deep breath and stepped forward. She placed her hand on the cold metal of the lens, channeling her love for Harmony Springs, her anger towards Davies and Burger Bliss, her unwavering determination to fight for what was right. "I, Eleanor Vance," she declared, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the lantern room, acting on behalf of the spirit of Lorelei and as a concerned citizen of Harmony Springs, do hereby invoke the ancient charter of this lighthouse. I declare a state of imminent peril to our coastline, and I call upon the rightful authorities to protect our town from those who seek to harm it. Her words, echoing through the night, were followed by a dramatic shift. The lighthouse beam, no longer sweeping across the ocean, swung inland, focusing its intense light directly on the town hall, bathing the building in an almost supernatural glow. The effect was immediate. People emerged from their homes, drawn by the unusual light, their faces filled with confusion and alarm. The town council members, still inside the town hall, reviewing Daniel's evidence, were startled by the sudden, blinding illumination. The focused beam, acting almost like a spotlight, drew attention to the town hall, to the council members, and to the evidence of their corruption that Daniel had presented. It was a symbolic act, a bold declaration, a visual representation of the community's demand for justice. The reporters, alerted by the unusual activity, rushed to the scene, their cameras flashing, their questions flying. The story of Harmony Springs, of the corrupt town council, of the corporate greed, and of the community's fight for survival, was about to go national. Evie, Mac, and Lily, standing in the lantern room, watched as the scene unfolded below. They had thrown a stone into the still waters of Harmony Springs, and the ripples were spreading far and wide. They knew that they had taken a huge risk, that they had challenged powerful forces, and that the consequences could be severe. But they also knew that they had done the right thing. They had stood up for what they believed in, they had fought for their community, and they had ignited a spark of hope that could not be easily extinguished. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky with hues of pink and orange, Evie felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Mac, his face filled with admiration and love. "You did it, Evie," he said, his voice filled with emotion.
You saved our town.
Evie smiled, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "We did it, Mac," she said. Together, they embraced, the rising sun casting a golden glow on their faces. They had danced with danger, they had embraced the unknown, and they had found a new, deeper love, a love forged in the crucible of adversity, a love that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight might have not been what brought them together, but now, with their final waltz, was where it truly started. And everything was beautiful again. Chapter 20. Second Chance September Sunset. The events at the lighthouse triggered a chain reaction that reverberated far beyond the confines of Harmony Springs. The national media, drawn by the dramatic story of a small town fighting corporate greed and corruption, descended upon the community, turning it into a symbol of resistance and resilience. The town council, facing mounting public pressure and a potential criminal investigation, rescinded their approval of the Burger Bliss proposal. Several council members, implicated in Daniel's evidence of bribery, resigned in disgrace. Colonel Davies, his reputation tarnished, his ambitions thwarted, retreated from Harmony Springs, leaving behind a legacy of bitterness and resentment. Burger Bliss, facing a public relations nightmare, abandoned its plans for the town, licking its wounds and seeking easier targets. The victory was sweet, but it was also hard-won. The community had been tested, divided, and scarred by the conflict. But it had also emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to protect its heritage, its environment, and its way of life. As September drew to a close, casting a golden glow over the Maine coastline, Evie and Max stood on the beach, hand in hand, watching the sunset. The sky was a canvas of vibrant colors, a breathtaking masterpiece painted by nature itself. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Evie said, her voice filled with contentment. Mac nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just like you," he said, his voice soft and tender. Evie smiled, her heart overflowing with love. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "We did it, Mac," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We saved our town." "We did," Mac agreed. "But it wasn't just us, Evie. It was the whole community. It was the spirit of Harmony Springs, the spirit of Lorelei, the spirit of everyone who refused to give up." They stood in silence for a few moments, savoring the peace, the beauty, and the profound sense of accomplishment that filled their hearts. "What now?" Evie asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "What happens next?" Max smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Now," he said, "we live happily ever after. We run our bookstore, we restore our lighthouse, we paint our pictures, and we love each other. We take it one day at a time, and we cherish every moment." He paused, his gaze turning serious. "And we keep fighting," he added. "We keep fighting for what we believe in. We keep protecting our community, our environment, and our future. We never give up." Evie nodded, her heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be new challenges, new obstacles, new battles to fight. But she also knew that they would face them together, their love a constant source of strength, guidance, and inspiration. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of purple and indigo, Mac turned to Evie, his eyes filled with love. "Marry me, Evie," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Marry me, and let's spend the rest of our lives together, here in Harmony Springs, surrounded by the people we love, doing what we love." Evie's heart soared. She had waited so long for this moment, for this man, for this love. "Yes, Mac," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I will marry you." He took her in his arms and kissed her, a long, tender, passionate kiss that sealed their promise, a kiss that celebrated their love, their resilience, and their unwavering commitment to each other and to their community. As they stood there, embraced on the beach, beneath the watchful beam of the restored lighthouse, Evie and Mac knew that their second chance September had blossomed into a lifetime of love, a lifetime of happiness, a lifetime of making a difference in the world. The sunset marked not an ending, but a glorious, hopeful beginning, a testament to the enduring power of love, community, and the courage to fight for what truly matters. It was the most beautiful painting either could ever hope to have, and they had all the colors to live with no matter what it may be.
Epilogue.
The years that followed were a tapestry woven with threads of joy, challenge, and unwavering love. Evie and Mac, married beneath the watchful eye of the Port Hope Lighthouse, became the heart and soul of Harmony Springs. Bound by the sea, now co-managed by Evie and a bright young woman named Sarah, the same Sarah who had sought Evie's help years before, now a thriving young mother, expanded, becoming a cultural hub for the town. It hosted book signings, poetry slams, art exhibitions, and lively discussions that drew in locals and tourists alike. The lighthouse, fully restored and gleaming white against the rugged Maine coastline, became a symbol of resilience and hope. The keeper's cottage, transformed into a charming museum, told the story of Port Hope, of Evie and Mac's enduring love, and of the town's courageous fight against corporate greed. Visitors from all over the world came to climb its winding stairs, to gaze out at the vast expanse of the ocean, and to feel the spirit of Lorelei, the sea breeze siren, whose legend continued to inspire and protect the town. Evie's art flourished. Her paintings, vibrant with the colors of the Maine coast, the spirit of the community, and the enduring power of love, gained national recognition. She held exhibitions in prestigious galleries, her work sought after by collectors and admired by critics. But her greatest joy came from teaching, from nurturing the artistic talents of the young people of Harmony Springs, passing on her passion, her skills, and her unwavering belief in the power of art to change the world. Mac, ever the steady anchor in Evie's life, continued to support her dreams, to champion her art, and to love her with a depth and intensity that only grew stronger with time. He found contentment in his role as a community leader, a mentor to young fishermen, and a guardian of the lighthouse, ensuring that its beam continued to shine brightly, guiding lost souls home. James Jr. and Emma, initially skeptical of their mother's late-life romance, eventually came to embrace Mac as a member of their family. They saw the joy he brought to Evie's life, the unwavering support he provided, and the genuine love that bound them together. They learned, through their mother's example, that love knows no age, no boundaries, and no limitations. Harmony Springs, under the watchful eyes of Evie, Mac, and a new generation of community leaders, continued to thrive, a testament to the enduring power of resilience, unity, and a deep connection to the land and the sea. The threat of corporate encroachment remained, but the town, fortified by its past struggles, stood ready to defend its identity, its values, and its soul. One crisp autumn evening, many years after their second chance September, Evie and Mac, their hair now completely silver, their faces etched with the wisdom and beauty of a life well lived, stood on the widow's walk of the lighthouse, watching the sunset paint the sky with fiery hues of orange and gold. "It's been a good life, hasn't it, Mac?" Evie said, her voice soft and filled with contentment. Mac nodded, his arm around her waist, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The best," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Better than I ever could have imagined." They stood in silence for a few moments, savoring the peace, the beauty, and the profound sense of gratitude that filled their hearts. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land and the sea, Evie felt a gentle breeze whisper through her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of salt water and wildflowers. And she heard, or perhaps imagined she heard, the distant, ethereal melody of the sea breeze siren, a song of love, loss, and enduring hope, a song that would forever echo in the hearts of those who called harmony springs home. Their masterpiece complete and was ready.